Good morning. Today I'd like to introduce Danielle Blunt. Danielle has been teaching this class at OLLI, I think since 2008. I first came into OLLI. It was my first class I took in 2010, and Ellie and I were just about to retire. And I do most of my own retirement work, but I'm no expert at it, and Danielle is. And so I went to her class, and that confirmed that, yeah, I could really retire. And I wasn't missing too many things, a few, but two. And I continue to go to her class at OLLI in the normal times to this day, because there's always something changing. And she is very good at covering those things that are changing. So Danielle founded Blunt Wealth Services, who's affiliated with Raymond James. She is a certified financial planner, which is a relatively tough test to get through. I mean, she went through UCLA, but then you got to go through and get trained to be a certified financial planner. And she has done that, did that a long time ago before I met her. She has been doing this for a long time. She focuses on helping women in their wealth management, and she also focuses on the general category of retirees and then those thinking about retiring. And even for the younger of you, if there's any in the audience, it's never too early to think about what you're going to do when you're in retirement, because it comes up all together too fast. So I would like to welcome Danielle and have her get started with this. She's just returning from a vacation, so I'm sure she will bring us up to speed a little bit on that as she goes. But welcome, Danielle, and good to see you again.
Thank you, thank you. All right, I'm gonna share my screen, and are we able to see that?
Absolutely.
Okay, sounds good. So what I thought we would talk about today, I've got retirement basics and income planning. And I'm going to break it out into three parts. I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the current environment and the markets. Two particular parts of the current environment, the COVID-19 and the impact to the economy and markets, and the upcoming election and some possible impacts to the markets with that. Then from there, I'm going to go to retirement basics so that we can all start on the same page and get some of the tools that we need to understand retirement income planning. And retirement income planning is really important, because what I say is when you grow your money, it's a relatively easy process. You invest systematically throughout your whole life, but when you stop working and you try to turn your life savings into income, it's a whole different challenge. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. I'm going to start with reading some information that I sent out to my clients talking about the current environment and COVID back in March. So let me give a little bit of background. One of the things that I do with OLLI and with my clients is we do a lot of ongoing education. I think it's really important to be educated so that you make smart investment decisions. The way I describe it is, if there's a fire in your house, you don't want to wait until the fire is going to figure out what your escape plan is. You want to know beforehand what your plan is, so that way if a fire does happen, you've already got it down. So one of the things we did in March was we sent out a lot of communications via email, via webinars, via hard letters, newsletters, helping our clients understand what was going on with the COVID situation as much as we could understand it at that point. We did have a bear market that went down nearly 35% in March. It was one of the swiftest bear markets that we'd ever seen, because there was so much uncertainty about the economy and COVID. So that's what I'm going to start with. Like I said, I'm going to read a little bit, because these are some of the emails that I sent out to clients that I pulled bits and pieces for, addressing the fear and uncertainty regarding the coronavirus and markets and the corresponding market declines. So the one thing is there's two distinct issues, and I experienced this in 2001 with my clients. The first one is the tragedy and the loss of human life. And the second is the economic impact and consequences from this event. So for this talk today, I'm going to focus solely on the economic impact, because that's my charge as an investment advisor, is to focus on that and protect your money. So investing principles are something that I teach. Investing principles: buy quality investments, own a diversified mix of investments, and own for the long term. Those are fairly easy in concept, but sometimes they're hard to actually execute. So this time is different. This is what I heard from clients, not only in March, but in 2008, 2009, 2000, 2001. This time and different, those are really the 4 most dangerous words that an investor can utter. And it may feel different this time, and I hear this a lot right now. This time is different, Danielle, this is different. It's scary. Some of it's very personal, especially when we get to politics. And people say it's something we've not faced as a country before. And what I would say to that is you would not be human if you didn't feel all these things. But I'm going to assert again that this time is not different. And when you actually capitulate to bear markets, you sometimes can't recover. One of the things we're very proud of is in March, we had no clients that panicked and sold their investments at the bottom. And some other advisors that I spoke with, as many as 30% of their clients sold at the bottom. And the problem is when you sell at the bottom is when do you get back in? So to this time is different. I say this too shall pass. So I'm going to go into the next slide now and talk a little bit about corrections and what is normal. And like I said, buying quality investments, a diversified mix of stocks and bonds, and holding for the long term is really the best way for long-term investment success. This chart here shows the different declines per calendar year. So the orange is how far during that calendar year that the markets dropped at any point during that year. So what you'll see is that almost in every year there was some sort of decline. On average, it was about a decline of 14% since 1980. The blue is where the markets ended up at the end of the whole calendar year. So again, think of it like a roller coaster. It goes down 14% or more, and then it comes back up. And the blue is where it ended. So again, there's a lot more blue above the line than below the line, which shows you that there's a lot more years where the markets ended positive versus negative. So this is good to see the market declines and to know that market declines are normal, they're necessary. I really think as uncomfortable as this market decline was and how horrific this disease is, there will be some good things that come out of it in terms of economy, technology, and just kind of pushing us forward. Even the simple act of not many of us had used Zoom beforehand, and now a lot of us are very familiar with Zoom. So always try to look for the light brights out of, making lemonade out of lemons. This is a good chart for showing the inter-year corrections. The next chart I'm going to show you is actually good for visualizing what does the market do. So when I teach classes, one of the things that I talk about is what is investing? And I'll ask people, what is investing to you? And I get all sorts of answers. But inevitably, I get somebody that says gambling. And I say it's actually a little bit different than gambling. It's actually quite a bit different than gambling. Gambling, you put all your money on red or you put all your money on black, and you got 50-50 chance, maybe a little bit less because the house has, double negatives, of winning. But here, if we look for the S&P 500, which is an index, and we look from 1926 to 2019, that's a total of 94 years. Out of those 94 years, 69 of them were positive. So that's all these greens. So this green, the blue, the greens over here, and the range from 0 to 8%, what years? 8 to 12%, 12 to 20, and more than 20. If we look at the negative years, there was 25 years or 27%. So we'll see there was some years that were 0 to 8, negative 8 to 12, negative 12 to negative 20. And then there were some whopper years, the ones that we've just seen recently, 2002, 2008 were more than 20% negative years. So number of years that we gained more than 20%, 35, negative number of years that we lost more than 25%, 6. So let's just take a step back and just look purely at the numbers. And if I were to tell you, if you were to play 94 hands of blackjack, and out of those 94 hands, you would win 69 of those hands and lose 25, and your wins are more than your losses, basically you would be playing blackjack all day long. So that's why this is not like gambling. In fact, the longer that you invest, the more likely you are to have a positive result. That's why we say we invest for our lifetimes and beyond. So those are the two little charts I wanted to talk about in general. I wanted to talk a little bit just about the economy. And like I said at the beginning of this, we've been doing webinar Wednesdays for our clients in the early days, every Wednesday, and then every other week, and now twice a month, keeping an eye on the economy. And one of the questions that I've gotten from that is, Danielle, the COVID is so, prevalent, yet the economy and the markets don't seem to just be shrugging it off. They don't seem to be reacting to it. And so what I'll say to that is, in the beginning, if you remember, like I just said, we went down 35%. The market downturn was swift. What was different this time is we had an unprecedented amount of stimulus enter the economy. So if we look back to the Great Depression and how much, or how little I should say, stimulus went into the economy during that time, that's one of the reasons why the Great Recession or Great Depression took so long. If we look at the Great Recession back in 2008, 2009, we put a large amount of stimulus in right away, or at least unprecedented amounts in that time, and it took a couple years. This time, we put more stimulus immediately into the economy, which is why the economy and the markets bounced back so quickly. One of the things right now is there's still a lot of gridlock in Congress as to, is there going to be more stimulus, and the market is kind of sputtering because it wants to see if there's more stimulus coming. Also, the Fed did some things by dropping rates to 0 almost immediately, which was, again, unprecedented to help the markets. So we had a huge negative GDP number in Q2. It was not seen before. We basically closed the country down. In Q3, it's bounced back. And we do think that it will continue to build back over the next year in 2021. Jobs will probably lag a little bit. Employment or unemployment are lagging indicators. So if you're going to wait for unemployment to get back to what you think is normal at 5% or 4% or wherever it is that you feel is normal, you're going to have missed the market train, because that's one of the last things that catches up with the economy. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say on the economy. I'm going to go to elections, and then we're going to breathe for some Q&A, because this is a lot of stuff that I'm putting out here right now. So I've had, again, 20 years in investing, and a lot of presidents have come and gone, and almost every election I've had somebody say, Danielle, if that idiot gets elected, Danielle, if that idiot gets reelected, and I don't know what idiot they're talking about. It goes both ways. So here's my thing is, we don't play politics with your portfolio. Politics belongs in your personal lives aside, not in your portfolio. And what we've learned is that one president, whether it's Republican or Democrat, doesn't make or break the stock market. So I brought this slide up, and then, like I said, at the end, I have a whole webinar in a couple of weeks that we're going to be talking about the election, but I just wanted to bring this one slide up that says the next president is unlikely to sink the economy or the stock market. And if we look at going back to Reagan, in 1980, critics of Reagan said he was a former actor, he lacked experience, he was belligerent towards the Soviet Union, which would lead to a nuclear war. Reaganomics is dangerous, won't work. And then what we look at is GDP and then the average return of the S&P 500 during his presidency. And again, we look at Bush and some of the critics, not a strong leader like Reagan, lacks vision. And GDP was 2.2 and the S&P 500 was 15%. And then we get to Clinton in 92. His critics said he was just a governor of a small state. He wasn't really proven on the big track records. Tax increases under him will sink the economy, and government takeover of healthcare will nationalize 20% of the US economy. Again, GDP 3.9 and the S&P 500 index 17.2. So one more page, we've got, again, 2000, and I'm going to kind of skip through it. We've got George Walker Bush, 2.2. His term was negative 2.9. Then we had Barack Obama, and again, critics said he was inexperienced. He had rhetoric and promises that were just words, and his desire for the large stimulus bill and the healthcare plan will explode the national debt. GDP was a little slower, 1.6, but the return was still 14.5%. And Donald Trump in 2016 had never held political office, doesn't speak or act in a way that's presidential. Trade wars will damage the economy. GDP under him has been 2.5% with an average annual return of 12.2%. So don't fret if one party or the other party gets elected in November. It generally has less of an impact on the markets and the economy than many people think. This is an overview of the retirement planning process. So I'm going to go more in depth on some of the topics in the second part of this. I'm going to just kind of cover this real quickly. But one of the main things I think when we decide we want to retire, and when I talk about retirement, the main thing that I talk about is freedom from having to work. You can still work, and we'll talk about that. But basically having the ability to stop working to continue working because you want to, and not because you have to. So what kind of retirement do you want? When do you want to retire? And then how long will retirement last are all things that we need to talk about. Think of it like taking a road trip. I just came back, like I said, from a 2-week RV trip, and we planned out how many miles, how far we were going to go, how much we were going to spend on gas, where we were going to stay. Because you would never plan a road trip, or at least I wouldn't, just jumping in the car and taking off. You know, we got to figure out where are we now, where are we trying to go, and how are we going to get there. So we have a plan. And we look at some of the basic questions. We crunch the numbers. We look at what tax advantage retirement vehicles we have or might need, and look at any other considerations. And then we also want to protect against undue risk. Like I said, we had some car trouble at the end. That was a risk. So basic considerations, what kind of retirement do you want? I ask this question with clients or new clients. I get a lot of independence, freedom to travel, the ability to live where I want to stay in my home. I want to move to a vacation home. I want to provide for kids or grandkids. So really thinking about what is it that's important to you that you want in retirement. And then looking at when do you want to retire. So usually on Saturdays, we get people that are not retired quite yet. So remember that the earlier you retire, the shorter the period you have for accumulation, and then also the longer that those dollars will need to last. So sometimes even just putting retirement off a year or so can make a big difference in your retirement planning. And it also depends on when you decide to retire in terms of what we call sequence of returns that we'll talk a little bit about more later. And then understanding that Social Security isn't available until as early as 62. Again, we're going to talk more about this in the second half. And that Medicare begins at 65, at least currently. And again, healthcare costs are definitely one of the highest expenses that I see retirees having to deal with. The other thing is, how long will retirement last? We use actuarial numbers, so we have programs that says just basically based on your gender and your age right now, how long you're going to live till. The average 65-year-old, we're looking at least another 20 years. Some people go into their 90s. Some people have longevity into their late 90s. I have a client whose mother is over 100 right now. So basically what we always do is we try to plan for a long, healthy retirement. It says life expectancy is average to increase, sometimes 25 or more years. Okay, crunching the numbers. So one of the things that we look at is our retirement expenses, and then where's our income sources coming from? Again, I'm going to go more in depth into this, but basically, what do I need, what is coming in, and then what's the gap. And that's going to be our investment goal, and we've got to account for inflation. There is something I want to say on inflation right now. I'm going to go back to that. Just keep it there. So inflation right now, inflation has been relatively tame, and I think people have gotten kind of complacent about inflation. The Fed had a target about 2%. That was their cap, and they wanted to keep inflation below 2%. And they've done a good job at doing that with a variety of tools at their disposal. One of the big changes, though, that just happened recently that I think people need to pay a little bit more attention to in terms of inflation is they've changing the way that they're attacking it in terms of before inflation was the cap was 2%, and if it got too high, they would do things to keep it below 2%. Now they're saying if inflation has been averaging 1% and our goal is 2%, we can let inflation hit 3% for a little while because what we really want is the average. But think of inflation like a Mack truck on the freeway. If that Mack truck is going and going and going, you're like, okay, it's going at 3%, it's going at 3%. Oh, now let's slow it down. It's difficult to slow down quickly. So we do think not in the next year to 2 years. I don't think we need to worry about it this soon, but I think in the next 3 to 7 years, we really need to look at inflation, and nothing will eat at your savings and eat at your cost of living and eat at the quality of your life faster than inflation and taxes. Again, for those that know me at the OLLI classes, those are the two devils that I say are on each of your shoulders that we need to keep an eye on. And we just talked about with the debts and deficits and taxes at some point will go up. And we're looking again at a 20 to 25 year retirement period, and inflation we've got to account for. So we can't take our eyes off those two balls. How much are we going to need in retirement? There's general guidelines, rules of thumb, 60 to 90%. I don't care for those as much because rules of thumb, I always tell people, you know, that's what happens to rules of thumb. Really what I try to help people is figure out what are they actually spending now and how are they going to change, or how may they change? When will the mortgage come off if you haven't paid off your house already? Are healthcare costs going to increase just between now and 65, or are they covered under your employer? Do you want to travel more? So that bucket will need to increase. So I think if we look at actual expenses and how they're going to change, that makes more sense. And then include estimates for retirement pursuits or hobbies. So like one of my clients wanted to get into woodworking, and we set aside a budget that he can go through and get the equipment, get the materials, and he's actually ended up setting up a small little side business for fun on woodworking. So make sure that you include any of those things in your retirement expenses. So when we look at retirement income, most of us, if we're lucky, have what we call a three-legged stool. We have Social Security, we have traditional employer pension. I think some of the younger people today, less and less have those traditional employer pensions. And we have our individual savings and investments. Most of the time, our 401k is our biggest investment savings vehicle. So we hopefully have a three-legged stool. Then we're going to look at identifying the gap. So I'm just going to scroll down so we can see the whole picture. So we have our estimated annual expenses in retirement over here. I like to break this orange part down into needs and wants. I think it's a lot easier to do that. Danielle, I need $5,000 a month or $60,000 a year, absolutely, to have any type of life. But I would like $8,000 a month, or whatever that is for you. That way, if there is a downturn, one of the biggest things in retirement income planning that people need to account for, especially if it's a prolonged downturn, is looking at decreasing what they're spending. So during March and April, when there was still a lot of uncertainty, and we had certain clients that were systematically withdrawing from their investment accounts a set amount, we actually reached out to see if they could reduce that so that it would not keep eating at their portfolio while the market was down. And especially since we were in lockdown and not able to travel anywhere, quite a few clients said, yep, stop my SWIPs altogether or lower it down, and they knew exactly what they needed to do to get to those numbers. So I like to have this broken down into needs and wants, so that way you can make that adjustment quickly. We look at what our annual income is from our sources like Social Security and pensions, and then we look at the gap, or what we need to withdraw from our investment portfolio. So we're going to, again, dive into this more into the second half, and this puts some numbers ahead of it, okay? There is also something called a reliance rate, which I find makes a big difference on how people's behavior impacts their investment strategy. So a reliance rate is how much you're relying on your portfolio for that income. So in other words, if you have $50,000 in expenses and 30,000 of that is coming from your portfolio, your reliance rate is 60%. Just that's the hardest math I'm going to do all day. Basically, if this was 100, that was 60, and that was 40, you'll see you're relying on your portfolio for 60% of your retirement income. That's actually kind of a high reliance rate. The higher the reliance rate is, the more likely you are to get more nervous when the markets go down. Obviously, if you're not relying on your portfolio for income at all, you have pensions and Social Security that cover all of your living expenses, it's a lot easier to see your portfolio value go up and down. So if the reliance rate is higher, 50% is usually kind of as high as I like to get. We might look at supplementing some of this need with an annuity, which will guarantee more income. And again, we're going to get into that in the second half. But I wanted to just kind of start the conversation with that here, talking about reliance rates and how much you're relying. That's nothing to do with your withdrawal rate. This is your reliance rate. And this is where I always find it hard, because I'm speaking to a computer and not seeing head nods. So I'm hoping everybody's nodding their head like this. All right. So let's go down to how we make this portfolio give us income. Basically, we spend our whole working years accumulating. Then we get to the apex, and we turn around and we figure out how to make it pay us for the rest of our 25 years. So in this scenario, you'll see that it's a $384,000 lump sum, would allow you to withdraw $30,000 each year for 25 years, assuming a couple assumptions, assuming that your funds are going to grow at 6% per year. The issue with this scenario that you'll see right here, though, is it assumes that year 25, you spent everything down to zero. And most people aren't comfortable doing that, because what happens if I live 26 years or 27 years, or that's when I start needing some long-term care. So generally what I like to see is I like to see this green line either flat or upward rising. But again, it's everybody's comfort level. If you have 384 and you're going to say, Danielle, my floor is 100,000, then I don't want to go below 100,000. I can figure out how much you can spend to keep it at 100,000. Some people say, I don't want to spend any of my principal. I only want to spend, what the principal is generating. We can do that too. It's really all on your risk tolerance and what you're comfortable with. I very rarely, people might say it in theory, I want to write my last check as one foot's in the grave and have that check bounce type of thing. But very rarely do I have people that say, yes, I'm going to spend all my money down to zero. And again, looking for inflation. So at a 2.2% annual inflation, you'll see that this blue is our nominal dollars, and this is green is inflation adjusted. So sometimes even when I do a portfolio review and I'll show at the end of the retirement period, you have $1 million left, and they go, oh, that's a lot of money. And I said, well, remember, that's in today, tomorrow's dollars. So it's not going to be as much. So we've got to keep into account inflation. In fact, we'll just go back to that one. In fact, what this is saying is over that 20 years, you'll see it eats into your purchasing power by about half. Or the other way to look at it is it'll take twice as much to get the same basket of goods. All right, so we're going to look at our tax deferred vehicles. I'm going to talk a little bit about 401ks and Roth IRAs and tax deferral. I'm also going to talk about what I call tax diversification. So I think the question that we had earlier about taxes, and I said at some point taxes will go up. How they go up, I don't know. Are they going to tax our capital gains? Are they going to tax our income? We generally see a trend going towards taxing wealth versus taxing income. And that concerns me for retirees because that's what you guys have spent your whole lifetime accumulating is your wealth. In terms of 401ks, they are tax deferred. One of the things that I hear from people, again, assuming their 401k is their largest retirement asset, is, Danielle, every time I want to draw out of my 401k, I have to pay tax on it. Yes, you do. You know, it's tax deferred. You've never paid tax on that. Even when your beneficiaries receive that and they inherit that, they still have to pay tax on that. That's not stepped up. It's inside your IRA. But what this slide shows, and I like it because of that, is it shows even if we were tax deferred and we grew it over 30 years, so that's your working lifetime, let's say 30 to 60, and then you took it all out at once, which most of us don't do. We pull it out of our IRA or our 401k as we need it to generate income. But even if we took it all out at once and paid tax on it, we would still have 43,000 and some change after tax versus if we saved outside of our IRA along the way, we wouldn't have to pay as much tax because we paid some tax along the way, but it'd only be worth 38,000. So why I think this slide's important is a lot of people get upset. Oh, I have to pay tax. I can't pull out of my IRA. I have to pay tax. But that tax deferred vehicle, my point is still a good vehicle to save in. Your IRA and your 401k are still the best retirement vehicle to save in for tax deferred growth. Because remember, all these years, instead of paying Uncle Sam, you've been able to keep that money in your 401k and let it compound. Okay? All right. So let's look at IRAs. Money gets into your IRAs two ways. It goes either 401k rollover or you make contributions. These contributions, they go up every year. 2020's numbers are higher. But let me tell you, nobody's retiring on $5,000, $6,000, or $7,000, dollars a year. So they're nice, but really it's your 401k that gets you there. So I'm going to kind of skip down to this slide because this is going to show the differences between the traditional and the Roth. So traditional IRAs, to open up a traditional IRA, to start a traditional IRA, you must have taxable compensation and you must be under, it's now 72. That age has changed. That was part of the last laws that just went through. So a lot of people will ask, can I open an IRA for my grandkids? And the answer is as long as they have taxable compensation, okay? Are they deductible? It depends on whether you're covered under an employer-sponsored plan, and it depends on your filing status. Most of the time, they are deductible if you're not covered under a plan, though. And then the Roth IRA allows, allows you to contribute to your Roth IRA. There's no tax deduction going in, but as long as you satisfy certain rules, like letting it sit there for 5 years, and being over 59 and a half, you can get that money calorie free or tax free. So I like to have a combination of some traditional and some Roth IRA. That gives you tax diversification. That way, if you come to the point where you say, Danielle, I want to take this big trip, but it's going to cost $50,000, we have the choice. Do we want to pay tax on it, pulling it out of the traditional IRA, or do we want to have it tax-free coming out of the Roth IRA? I think conversion strategies, especially between 60, 62 to 70, 72, are definitely conversations that you should be having. It's generally pay tax now for tax-free later, or no tax now for tax-free later. That's what these two buckets come to. But I like to have choices. And I think by having a Roth IRA and even converting small amounts so that when you're in your 70s or in your 80s, and we're at that point where taxes are very, very high on wealth, You have the options to pull out of them. Again, what I talked about, distributions, you have to be 59 and a half. If you're younger than that, it's a 10% penalty. For those that want to retire that are under 59 and a half, there's some vehicles and ways that we can pull money out of your traditional IRA. It's called a 72T. They're pretty technical. You want to make sure you have a professional, especially a CPA, help you with those. But there are ways to get that out prematurely without that penalty if you want to retire earlier than 59 and a half. But most of the time it's 59 and a half. Like I said, the Roth IRA has the 5-year holding requirement. This 5-year holding requirement is from either your first contribution or the date of conversion. That calendar year, it goes back to January 1st. So for instance, if you were to convert today to part of your money from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, your date of conversion actually goes back to January 1st of 2020. And that's where your 5-year holding period starts. There's other things you can take money out of the Roth IRA for, but really it should be for retirement income. And again, the benefit is it's federally tax-free. So the advantage is you're paying a little bit of tax now or tax-free later. Okay, so a question I get is, which one is better for me? And again, I'm going to say, I think you should have both. Me personally, I contribute to my 401k through my corporation, and part of my 401k goes into a traditional and part of my 401k goes into a Roth. I have kids that are working. I make all of them put money into their Roth IRA as well, because I want them to have that same tax diversification. So I'm a big believer in trying to do both. I know there's some people that might be very high on the income scale where they said, I want every deduction, and they put it all in their traditional IRA. So I think the choice is definitely something that's more personal and what you envision for your retirement. If you're more concerned about saving the dollar today and don't care about the dollar in the future, the traditional IRA is the way to go. But if you're a little bit more concerned about taxes in retirement, you definitely want to have some Roth IRA. All right, so this talks about the money that can go into your 401k plans. Again, the numbers have gone up a little bit in 2020. One of the most important things I think also on 401k plans is finding out if your employer matches. If your employer matches, you should definitely be putting at least that minimum amount into the 401k. There's also catch-ups for people that are 50 years and older. And again, the employer match, that's free money. And we're going to go to the Roth again, which I've done already, kind of repeats itself. And so then this is where we're going to talk a little bit about annuities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of cover the very, very basics in annuities here. I do a whole class on annuities because they're so complicated. But the bottom line is an annuity is a contract with an insurance company. And there's many flavors of annuities. And I get people all over the gamut that they'll say things like, I love my annuity. I hate annuities. Annuities are expensive, you know, and it's almost like cars. You can't say a car is expensive in terms of there's cars that are $15,000 a year, you know, to buy, and there's cars that are $50,000. So there's just so many different flavors. So whenever somebody says, I love my annuity or I hate my annuity, I always try to get more information. What is it exactly? Some people will call their pensions annuities, and that's it's similar, but it's really a pension. So basically the annuity is a contract with an investment company, with an insurance company, and they invest your money, and there's certain promises that they'll make in the future. One of the main benefits of annuities is they continue to grow tax deferred. They can provide a death benefit, and there's no limit on how much you can put into an annuity. I never recommend what I call the word all into anything, but there is no limit on how much you can put in the annuity. Most distributions are subject to ordinary income taxes. That's for the majority of annuities. And again, if you pull it out before, if it's qualified and you pull it out before 59 and a half, there's penalties on it. What I look at is, rather than what I tell people is, if I'm an annuity salesperson and all I have in my little bucket is annuities, just like if I'm a carpenter and all I have is a hammer, everything's going to look like a nail. So I use an annuity as a tool to kind of bridge that gap, going back to the reliance rate. So if we want to say generate $10,000 a year of income from the annuity, we can back into that annuity to see how much do we want to put in the annuity to guarantee that income stream. Annuities can provide guaranteed income for life. Again, there's all different ways that they can do this. One of the most confusing things that I think I hear from people is my annuity is earning 5% or my annuity is earning 6%, and most of the time they're not. It's an income stream. So bottom line, I think, for annuities is they can be a tool. You can use them for part of your money, and they're not right for everyone. They can be expensive, and you need to also look at the claims paying ability of the annuity insurer, making sure that they're a strong annuity company. So that's my little quick one on annuities. So here's the general investment considerations that we want to be looking at. What's our timeline? What's our risk return considerations? Take into account inflation, the return that we need to achieve our goal. What's our risk tolerance, and make sure that we have proper diversification. Risk tolerance is something that I think is flexible, but really should be flexible only to a certain extent. What I mean by that is it's very easy for people to say they're risky when the markets are doing good, but they're risk averse when the markets aren't doing good. And that's not a risk tolerance. That's just somebody flip-flopping. So risk tolerance, you know, as you get older, maybe you get a little less risk tolerant, but some people will actually get more risk tolerant as they get older because they're like, okay, I've seen these markets, been there, done that. I'm not relying on my portfolio as much. I have more in an annuity, more in pensions. So risk tolerance can change, but like I said, it shouldn't be going from, if we're talking about driving a car, 0 to 100. It should be somewhere between, let's say, 55 and 65 or 65 and 70, you know, somewhere in there. Oops, and what was the last one? And then periodically evaluating. Just because you buy an investment at one point and it's a good investment doesn't mean it's always going to stay a good investment. In fact, during times of recession, we tighten our screens when we evaluate investments. And again, we only want the cream that floats to the top. We only want the best of the best. So I think I'm going to just basically touch briefly on this disability income if you're working, and life insurance if you're not working. Again, these are longer lectures, but disability insurance, the main thing there is if somebody is relying on your income and that income would go away because you can no longer work, either through a health emergency or an injury, you need to be looking at disability income insurance. And then life insurance really is, again, when you're working and if somebody is relying on your income, that replaces your income in the event of not just disability, but your unlikely death. So that's the two roles. As we get into the later years, life insurance becomes less important and long-term care insurance becomes more important. And you can actually, some policies convert. You can take the cash value in your life insurance policy and purchase a life insurance policy that has a long-term care rider on that, if that's something that you're interested in. So those are your types of insurances that you need to look at. And again, I might go through some of these a little bit quicker because I know we did talk about it earlier, but basically if we want to retire earlier, I think the main thing we need to look at is there an impact on Social Security? How are we going to pay the health care until Medicare kicks in? And understanding that we have fewer accumulation years and a longer distribution period. And then again, if we delay it, those things. And then working during retirement, do we want to work for part of it? So we might say we want to retire at 62, but I want to work part-time for the next 3 years. So we'll look at more and more people that are working, and that can also possibly give them access to health care. Okay, so every retirement plan has to balance 3 main goals. Maximizing your ability to enjoy retirement, just talking about golfing and bowling the other day. Manage the risk of outliving your income, and manage the risk of unexpected life events. So the way that I like to describe this is we plan for the best, but we prepare for the worst. So we plan for the ideal retirement, maximizing, managing the risk of outliving a good long life. And then we plan, we look at the risk of unexpected life events like long-term care needs, or what I see a lot is kids or grandkids that have lost a job, maybe losing a house. So I see a lot of retirees pulling money out of their portfolios to help family members. So plan for the best, but prepare for the worst. And here's the process. It's a 5-step process. Actually, I'm going to back up and go one by one. So again, going back to estimating how much income that you're going to need, needs and wants. We're going to look at major factors, inflation and taxes. We're going to look at where's our income coming from right now, Social Security and pensions. We're going to identify the gap and then use our savings or our investments to bridge the gap. So taking a deeper dive into how much income you're going to need, again, what I talk about is listing your expenses and looking at healthcare costs. One of the things that we have that's a really good tool is we have a pretty in-depth healthcare cost analysis that we can set things up to see what would it cost up to 65 when one spouse is on Medicare, when both spouses are on Medicare, and after we can look at what Medicare will not pay for, which is long-term care. And basically long-term care, what I tell people, it's either one of two things. Either you insure against the risk with an outside insurance company, or you provide to self-insure with your portfolio. Okay, so looking at paying out of pocket, relying on Medicaid, which Medicaid, basically you need to be broke to qualify for. Again, won't get into it too much. Or looking at long-term care insurance. So long-term care, most individuals over 65 will need long-term care at some point in their lives. We have, sadly, quite a few clients who are on long-term care right now. Some are in facilities, some are at their home. Our most expensive one is pulling about $40,000 out a month to cover all the long-term care. That's the most expensive one. She has saved very well and can afford it. But usually at least $5,000 to $10,000 to supplement the pensions is generally what I see people pulling out of their portfolios for long-term care. So again, what we need to do is we need to look and see, can we self-insure for that risk? And are we okay self-insuring? My question that I usually ask is, if something happened to you and we needed to pay extra for long-term care, where would we pull the money? One of the reasons why I like to make sure that we have cash available that we can immediately use if something were to happen, and then develop the long-term plan. Many people also rely on their home to cover long-term care costs. Well, Danielle, if I need long-term care, I'm going to sell my home, I'll move into a facility, and that's fine too, but just understand you can't choose when you need long-term care, and you can't choose if the housing market is a good point at that point for you to sell it to get your long-term care needs. So just kind of keep that in mind. We want to have some other alternatives. National average cost is about $82,000, and that's national, not California. Again, inflation and taxes. So I think the question again was, should I account for taxes? Yes. When we look at income, when I say, what do you want to spend, I'll ask people, after taxes, in today's dollars, I'll account for inflation. What do you need to live on every month? And then we back taxes out of that or into that, because tax law is always changing. Okay, so this goes through inflation again, just another way of looking at basically in 20 to 25 years, the cost of what things will cost will double, or basically your purchasing power gets cut in half. So we've seen that already. We're going to look at the different ways, like I said already, ordinary income tax or interest, long-term capital gains and dividends, and then tax-free income. So this is what I call tax diversification. If I added the Roth IRA on there, if you had your Roth IRA, so your tax-free and some municipal bonds, you had a 401k or an IRA or tax deferred, and you had an after-tax bucket of money, which is normally your trust or your savings account, those 3 buckets of money, that's ideal. That's what I want people to have in retirement, is those 3 buckets of money to be able to pull income out depending on where the tax laws are. We can pull out of the Roth, we can pull out of the IRA or the 401k, or we can pull out of your taxable investments. So there's market risk, and the market risk is just like that sounds. The risk of the market going up and down, volatility risk is one way to look at it. So let me explain this because this also goes back to the sequence of returns. So when you retire, when you're working and you're saving, market volatility works in your favor. You like it when the markets go up and down. You may not know you like it, but you like it because if you're putting money in your 401k every month and the markets are going down, you're actually buying more shares at a cheaper price. So in your accumulation years, market volatility works for you. I'm not a big fan of index funds. I think that they're more volatile than most retirees should or need to have. But if you're working and the index fund is in your 401k and you're younger, I think it's appropriate to have that in your 401k because it is volatile and you want that money going in systematically to take advantage of that volatility. When you retire, though, part of the goal is reducing volatility. You will never remove it, okay? You're never going to get rid of all market risk. I have people that will say, Danielle, I can't take any risk. I can't take any, I don't want to see my accounts go down. Well, that's not how markets work. We just went over in the beginning that markets do go down on average 14% at least one time a year, and they go on average down 5% 3 times a year. So market risk is a part of investing. But what we want to do as retirees is squash the volatility, have things that don't go as up and down as much, because now we're withdrawing from our portfolio. So we don't want to withdraw, just like I said, more shares to get the same amount of income if the markets are down. So that's market risk. It exists, but what we want to try to do is we want to try to squash it. Reinvestment risk is usually with the bond. So if I bought a bond 20 years ago and I got 6% on my bond, and I loved my 6% bond, and I got that 6% every year, but now my bond has matured or been called, a lot of them got called, I can only reinvest that at today's rates, which are lower. So that's reinvestment risk. That's really why a laddered, if you have individual bonds or individual CDs, a laddered portfolio is so important, that so you don't have everything maturing at one time and you're trying to struggle and scramble when interest rates are virtually zero right now to reinvest those bonds. Interest rate risk, that is the risk, because if you bought a bond and it is, let's say it's a 1% bond and rates start going up, the value of your investment goes down. It's an inverse relationship between interest rates and the value of your bonds. So if, for instance, if people panicked and bought like a 30-year bond at 2% or 3% and interest rates started going up, that bond can go down significantly. The longer that you loan your money out for, the more interest rate risk you're susceptible to. So that is definitely a consideration. There's all sorts of risks. So again, we can't avoid risk. What we want to try to do is understand it. I always tell people education is one of the best things in terms of understanding risk. Just to give you guys an example with the bonds, I taught, it was actually an OLLI class, and he came to me afterwards and he said, Danielle, I bought these bonds and I thought they were supposed to be safe, but I put 100,000 in and it's worth 80,000. I lost money on my bonds. And again, he didn't understand interest rate risk because interest rates had gone up and his price of his bond had gone down. So education and understanding these risks is very important. So again, our 3-legged stool, if we're lucky enough to have our pension and Social Security, and then we should have our individual savings and retire investments. So Social Security, I'm going to start a little bit on this, again, because hopefully the Saturday classes, we have some people that maybe have not started drawing Social Security. The biggest question I get is, Danielle, when should I start drawing Social Security? And again, it varies. Generally, I tell people in general, if you can afford to wait, you should wait. Couple of things in Social Security, it's a guaranteed right now 8% earnings on your Social Security after 62. So between 62 and 70, you're getting 8% compound on those Social Security earnings. The other thing that I tell people that they don't really think about is if you get cost of living increases in Social Security, which Social Security does build them in. I don't believe they are all of it. I usually calculate it at about 2/3 of cost of living, but you do get some small COLAs or cost of living adjustments. If you have a higher base amount and then you're taking that 2 to 3% on that higher base amount and you're talking over time going into your 70s, your 80s, and your 90s, that cost of living compounds so that your Social Security actually ends up being one of your largest sources of income by the time you're in your 80s and 90s. And if you talk about longevity risk, that is actually a good way to combat longevity risk without any out of pocket. So delaying Social Security, if you're concerned about longevity risks, is one of the best moves that people can make. But there's also other considerations. How many years have you worked? They look at your 35 highest earning years. Do you have the investments that you can withdraw on to live off of to gap between when you get Social Security? So sometimes I'll have people that retire at 62, they have a portfolio of investments. We withdraw a little bit more than we would to get their living that they need. But we know that when Social Security kicks in at 70 and we've gotten that 8% guaranteed compound and that cost of living on top of that 8%, that we reduce their withdrawals from the portfolio and Social Security takes over. So we actually just had a client that did that the other day. He's like, Danielle, we waited, we've got Social Security now, the full retirement at 70, and we're gonna stop our withdrawals, and it worked out really nicely. So I think Social Security, when to take it, is one of the biggest decisions that people will make. I don't think if you're 58 or 59, you don't need to decide now. It's something that you keep looking at, but it is a big decision because once you make it, you can't change it. There we go. So again, when I work with people, and I just had this situation again where he worked for the county and he was getting his pension and he gave me the amount, and then he said, Danielle, I asked, does it go to your wife if something happens to you? And he says, I think so. And so my answer to I always think so is you're not going to be thinking so when you're dead and your wife's saying, no, it doesn't. So we need to find out, does it cover your spouse? And if it does, how much? 50%, 63%, 100%. So there's pensions that are for one life only. There's pensions that are qualified joint survivor annuities and pensions. And then there's lump sums. And the lump sum, most people will end up taking because they know that the pension usually goes away when they pass away or it goes to their spouse, but they can't leave it to their kids. And remember, you can take a lump sum and then still purchase an annuity at some point in the future. Just because you take the lump sum doesn't mean your annuity is completely ruled out. You're just purchasing a private annuity instead of having your employer purchase one of the annuities for you. You also want to find out, is there inflation adjustments on your pension, and read the plan explanation of benefits. And definitely, just like a life insurance policy, if you do have a qualified joint survivor pension, that have that in writing and have that somewhere like with your trust documents, that if something happens to you, your spouse has the paperwork to say this is a qualified joint. You don't want to leave it to somebody else to tell you whether it does or not. All right, again, looking at the gap, how much we need, how much is coming from Social Security and pensions, and that's our gap. And we're going to look at a couple things here now. We're going to look at the withdrawal rate and the order of withdrawals. We're also going to look at investment and asset allocation, specific investments, and products choice. So what I tell people is the two most important things in your portfolio is your asset allocation and the quality of what you own inside that. If I could boil a portfolio down to just two simple things, that's really what it comes down to. I hear a lot of people like, oh, Danielle, I heard a 60-40 or I heard 50-50. What asset allocation should I have? Well, it depends. I will say, though, that I think the days of the 50-50 portfolio allocation are behind us, mainly because of where interest rates and bonds have been, and where we think they're going in the future. More and more people are needing to derive their inflation protection and their income from companies, especially companies that pay dividends. So asset allocation, you can go as to like maybe 80-20, and some people, oh, that's aggressive, that's too much. Again, it just depends on what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve, and what the quality is, and how much of that asset allocation, if it's 80% in equities, is attributed to dividends. So it's not just 80-20, 60-40. It's, again, how much is international, how much is in dividends, how much is in growth, and so forth. And then second to that is the quality. So you can have two portfolios that are both 80-20, 80% equities and 80% equities in two portfolios, yet one portfolio does a lot better because of the quality of what you own. Okay, so that's the key to portfolio. I tell people it's buy, hold, and monitor. It's not buy, hold, and ignore. It's buy, hold, monitor, and adjust. Or the key word that I love to use, my clients know, and some of you guys that have heard me teach, is the R word, rebalance. Rebalance, 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 to get back to your asset allocation strategy. Okay, so a little bit about asset allocation and why it's important to rebalance. I'm going to give you guys a story going back to like the late 90s. If you remember, in the late 90s, we had the tech run-up, technology. We had strong market returns. I think in 99, it was over 30% that the stock market returned. So by the time that I got to 2000, which is when I started in the industry, people were saying like, well, I want 30% return. If you can't guarantee 30% return, Danielle, I'm not going to invest with you. And my answer was, I can't guarantee 30% return. What we do know, though, is that if the market has been strong for all those years, the 5 years from 95 to 99, if you started with the 50-50 portfolio, by the year 2000, that portfolio was more like 65-35, okay? And if you didn't rebalance to get back to your 50-50, you would have had 65% exposed to equities that then went through the 2000, 2001, even 2002 downturn. Vice versa, if you look at 2001 to 2002, if you started with 50-50, and then by the end of 2002, you would have had 65% in bonds and only 35% in equities. If you didn't rebalance, you wouldn't have taken advantage of the bull market from 2002 to 2007 for those 5 years. So rebalancing is very, very important. Effective asset allocation provides ongoing income, minimizes that volatility, maximizes the likelihood that savings will last as long as needed, and also make sure that you have enough inflation protection in there. The tools, these are all just the tools that can go inside that asset allocation, individual bonds or bond funds. As many of you might know, I'm a big fan of bond funds, whether they're taxable bond funds or tax-free bond funds. When I started in the early 2000s, individual bonds were very easy to purchase. Quality ones were easy to purchase for individual investors. I've been finding as the pensions and the institutions have taken up more of that, it really makes sense to go with the bond fund manager, especially since so many bonds can change ratings pretty quickly. So you can do this with a combination of bonds or bond funds. I think bond fund managers make more sense. Dividend paying stocks, like I said, those are companies that are paying you a dividend, so you're getting paid while you're waiting. Possibly CDs, possibly some tips, especially if we think inflation's going to start going up again, and then some balanced funds or distribution funds or growth funds or so forth. So rules of thumb, again, rules of thumb, I'm not a big fan of rules of thumb, but the rule of thumb is typically 4 to 5%. I think it makes sense to find a flexible withdrawal rate, which again is why I recommend making sure you have your needs versus wants, because in times of volatility, we want to reduce that withdrawal rate. It just also depends on where you are in your retirement years. If you're in your 80s, you can go higher than 4 to 5%. If you're in your early 60s, you want to be more conservative. It also depends on what type of portfolio you have. If everything is in CDs and they're earning 2%, this 4% rule doesn't work. So what I say is we want a sustainable withdrawal rate. So I don't necessarily look per se at 4% or 5%. I look at what are we trying to achieve, and can we sustain that withdrawal rate for the life of your for your life. And so that may change. It may be 3.5%, it may be 5%. There may be times where it's 8%, quite frankly, like I said earlier, because we're spending more until we bridge the gap with Social Security. So I think that this is something that you need to always be aware of. The other thing that I think is important to look at for a withdrawal rate is if you have $1 million, again, the hardest math I'll have you guys do all morning, and we're withdrawing, let's say, $50,000 a year, that is a 5% withdrawal rate. If the market goes down from $1 million, and they'll just say again, easy math, it's still Saturday morning, to 500,000, and you keep your same withdrawal rate, your withdrawal rate is now 10%. That 50,000 is higher. So that's where you want to, again, adjust and bring that withdrawal rate down when the market goes down. It's particularly important in the early years of retirement because of what we call the sequence of returns. Average investments, so I can have a portfolio that returns an average of, let's say 10%, that's high, but again, easy math. Year 1, it's 10%, year 2, it's 10%, year 3, it's 10%, year 4, it's 10%, you're getting my drift. You average all of that, you've earned 10%. Or you can have a portfolio that returns 20% and then 0, and 20% and 0, and 20% and 0. Same average, but a lot different path to get there. So that's why I'm saying we want to minimize volatility in retirement, because if you retire on a down year and you have to sell more shares, your likelihood of success goes down significantly. So that's something that we're always looking at, the sequence of returns. This is the other thing that people ask me about, order of withdrawals, which one should we take out first? So again, these are general rules of thumb. In general, we want to take out of our taxable accounts first. We want to let our tax deferred kind of cook and stew and keep growing tax deferred as long as possible. In general, we want to take out of our IRAs next. And lastly, we want to take out of our Roth IRAs. So that's in general. However, I said it all depends on where current tax laws are. If you think your income is going to be significantly higher or lower next year, as to what the order is or what mixture you pull out of. So I think that is the general rule of thumb: taxable, tax deferred, tax exempt, or Roths. But again, it depends on your tax situation. Okay, let me just talk on RMDs for a moment. The age actually went up to 72. RMDs have been waived this year. That was put back into March when the market went down. So nobody has to take a required minimum distribution this year. You had until August to put it back if you had taken it out. But that was a nice pass for today. And going forward, it starts at 72. And again, other sources of income. So the recap, looking at when we plan to retire, how long of a period you should plan for, how much annual income you're going to need, depends on your lifestyle and your goals and your needs versus your wants, how much you can expect from Social Security, from your pension, and when you want to start collecting Social Security, and then your savings, how you have that invested, what's your asset allocation, what's your knowledge on investments, what's the withdrawal rate that we're going to be doing, where are we going to pull the money from, in what order, and is there other sources of income, even like real estate rental income. So these are my disclosures that I have to put for any recording, so those need to be on there. This is also, I think Ellie said she's putting some stuff in chat, but if you didn't get anything or you want to get the workbooks that go along with what I did, you can email me. If you'd like a consultation, we do them via Zoom as well. You can definitely call me, email me, or call the office to set up a consultation. We'll give you the list of what you'll need to do that consultation. Or if you want to just receive invites to any of our future webinars, we've got, like I was telling Russ at the beginning, we've got one coming up on the elections where we're focusing all on that. We've also got one on trustees, successor trustees, and corporate trustees. And then by the end of the year, we've also got one on charitable giving and donor advised funds. So this is the schedule that we have. So if you want to get invites to those, let me know. It's a pleasure. I'm going to turn it over, stop sharing my screen, and turn it over to whoever is going to take it away for the rest of the, close it out.
This is Russ. I want to mention some up-and-coming classes that are all open to the public. Before that, Danielle, if you could mention your personal finance class. I know you have a time change for October. If you could mention that right now before I cover some.
Thank you. Danielle's class for personal finance in retirement will be held every Tuesday, the month of October, from 5 to 6:15 in the evening. And it's a great opportunity to learn. It's going to be a fast-paced class, but less fast-paced than the 2 hours that we had this morning.